introduction. The title has already been given. Actually, I will talk about adhesive bonding, as you see here, for instance, how to derive the stress distribution in an approximate manner. And of course, based on that, we want to predict the effective strengths in order to avoid failure mechanisms, as you see it here. So that's a situation of structural integrity. Well, the main point will be that I present a higher order modeling approach to you. We will compare it to numerical analysis and get the stress results. And based on that, then we will assess the effective strength, and I will show that this gives realistic predictions. I think we are all aware of the fact that adhesive bonding is a well-established joining technique with a number of advantages, but it has also some challenges, in particular due to the fact that in general we have stress concentrations, as you see it here, at these blue dotted locations of a single lab shear specimen. And this is typically the onset where we get debonding. And of course, that's something which has to be avoided. And what we need for that is a calculation procedure which is as simple as possible and as effective as possible and does not involve too much time. Of course, there is a number of existing descriptions and approaches going back to the time before the Second World War. There are established models which are not so bad as long as the adhesive layer is rather thin. But if you move to thicker layers, then these approaches get inaccurate, and that's where we want to improve something. And we do this by the use of a higher order modeling of the adhesive layer. I will present this to you. When we do this, we will follow an approach which was suggested by Bigwood and Procomber. That means we restrict the consideration to the overlapping region, to this local sandwich structure, and we will take into account the adherent structures just by the respective cross-sectional forces, which are then applied to this sandwich configuration. Yeah, and that's now the main point here. So we consider this sandwich configuration. We have an upper and lower adherent numbered by 1 and 2. And for these two adherents, we just use simple kinematics, Minkin kinematics, as you see written down here for the horizontal and vertical displacements. But for the adhesive layer in between, we work with the approach that you see here. We start with a linear interpolation, but we extend this by a quadratic term and by a cubic term for the horizontal deformation and for the vertical deformation. And in this way, we introduce new functions, phi and xi, which depend on the longitudinal axis, the coordinate x. And these quantities, these unknown functions, have to be determined together with the other existing functions here in this approach. And in order to do that, we first put them all together in an array. You see this here. This is this total quantity phi. It includes the deformation functions and their first derivatives. And now, in order to determine all these quantities, we make use of the principle of minimum potential energy, which is a quite established technique. We perform the required variational process, and in the end, we get a set of 10 linear differential equations of second order, or equivalently a set of 20 differential equations of first order. And in a condensed manner, this can be written down as you see it here, where the phis include our unknown functions, and A and B are known matrices, and D is a known right-hand side where the loading enters. This set of differential equations can be solved by standard methods, by an exponential solution approach, and the unknown constants then are determined by the given boundary conditions. So that works. And when you have these deformation functions, of course, you can also derive strains and stresses and whatever you need. We have implemented this in MATLAB, which is not difficult. And this runs very quickly. It takes about 1 second on a standard computer. In order to check whether we received the truth or not, we performed comparative numerical analysis by finite elements, by abacus. Here, this is a kind of mesh that we use with a good mesh refinement at the edges, well, a bit more than 1 million degrees of freedom. That takes about 2 minutes. But of course, you need the program and you have to do all this modeling, which takes some effort. And now let's look to some results for the situation of such a single lab shear specimen. Let's have a look at the resultant shear stresses starting from the left edge. That is given here on this diagram. The solid line curves are our predictions and the dots are the finite element results. And you see there's a pretty good correspondence. So our method is not bad, although it's a relatively simple approach. And here on the right-hand side, you see the peeling stresses and also with the stress concentration on the left side. And of course, in the shear stresses, we have also strong stress concentrations, which may be detrimental. And here again, a good correspondence between the calculation approaches. To check whether we are better than classical models, we compared the whole thing with the approach of Oyalvo and Eidenov, independence of the thickness of the disk layer. And you see our approach agrees very well with the finite element calculations, whereas for higher layer thicknesses, Oyalvo Eidenov unfortunately gets a bit inaccurate. But for lower thicknesses, they all agree. But you see when you go to 2 or 3 millimeters adhesive thickness, then this is a clear step to an improvement. That is given here for the shear stress and here for the peeling stress. In both cases, the same conclusion. This kind of analysis is not restricted to the single lab shear specimen. It can be also applied to other configurations. This is just a number of examples. Here a peeling joint, a teeth joint, here a patch on a substrate, and here aluminum patch on a steel substrate under thermal loading. It could also be ice on a substrate if you like to check this. And in all cases, you see very good correspondence agreement between the finite element calculation and our closed form analysis approach. Now, we do not only want the stress distributions, but we want to know what is the effective strength. When does failure occur? What is this critical loading case? And for that, we consider a possible debonding crack starting at the location of the stress concentrations, and we consider potential cracks. And in order to check whether they will occur or not, we follow the concept of finite fracture mechanics that makes use of a coupled criterion, namely a stress and energy criterion, which have to be fulfilled at the same time. In our case, we use this simple stress criterion, this quadratic one, but of course you can use also a different one. And for the energy release rate, we use this incremental energy release rate, which can be calculated from the differential one and which has to overcome the given fracture toughness. For the actual calculation, we split up in a mode 1 and mode 2 portion, and these two portions can be calculated by a respective Greg-Groscher integral, which is a standard technique. Okay, if you want to determine the load when this happens for the first time, and that means want to determine the effective strength, you have to look for the lowest force that fulfills both sub-criteria, and that means you have to solve such a kind of minimization problem, which can be done by standard algorithms. And if you do it, you will determine this kind of force where you have this kind of situation, namely, there is one crack length existent where the stress criterion is still fulfilled and the energetical criterion is already fulfilled. They are fulfilled for the same crack length, then this crack will be generated at the corresponding force. And that's what we want to know. So this can also be implemented. It's not very difficult. What you need, of course, you have to have access to the energy release rate. And for that, we have to extend our approach a bit. We have to split up the whole situation in a part and a portion. where we have already a crack and a portion which is still uncracked. And the kind of approach that I showed to you for the uncracked portion is known, and this has to be extended a bit for the cracked portion. Namely, there we have to include also a possible separation of the layers. So we have to introduce this additional crack opening. But this can be done. It's the same manner. And then you have to couple the both regions by continuity conditions, which is standard work that can be done. So this has also been implemented in MATLAB. And here, for the case of a single lap joint, you see the resultant crack opening. If there is a crack of a certain length, and you see there is again a pretty good correspondence to comparative finite element analysis. So this works as well. And here is the situation for the energy release rate portion 1, mode 2 portion, and the total energy release rate with this local maximum. And again here, finite element calculations and our calculations have a good correspondence to each other. So that means we can work with that, and we can now predict the effective strength, for instance, for such a single lap joint. And here you see results for an increasing adhesive layer thickness. These upper curves are the finite element calculations and our calculations with a good correspondence. And in addition, we have these experimental findings. And you see we can predict these experimental findings. So we can predict reality, and that's the essential thing. Here and you see the effect that an increasing adhesive thickness is not good because it goes along with a decreasing effective strength. That's the thing that is also observed experimentally, and it can be explained and predicted now in this way. And here you see the effect that the failure load increases with an increase of the overlap length, but in an under-proportional manner. And again, this can also be predicted in good correspondence to experimental findings. Yeah, the whole thing can also be applied to other configurations. For instance, this is just one example. When we have a patch, here is a carbon fiber reinforced patch, laminate patch on a concrete substrate under now thermal loading. And due to the mismatch of the thermal extension properties, if the load difference gets too large, this will peel off. And here you see the critical temperature independence of the adhesive layer. And again, you see that thick adhesive layers are not good. Better take small layer thicknesses because then the critical temperature is higher. So such things can be predicted, which may be helpful for the application. So that's it. Here are my conclusions. What I presented to you about this special third order approach for the adhesive layer, which allows a strength assessment. It goes along with very low computational effort, but has a good predictive quality. Yeah, that's it. If you have questions, you are welcome. Thank you.